My hands were still shaking when I pulled into the pickup line at Bright Horizons Learning Academy on Cascade Road. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October, 61 degrees, and the sky over Atlanta had gone the color of a bruise. I remember that detail because I remember everything about that day, every single thing. Zoe climbed into the back seat the way she always did, backpack first, then her little body, then that gap-toothed smile she gets when she's excited to tell me something. She buckled herself in, proud the way 6-year-olds are proud of small things. Then she looked out the window, and she stopped smiling.
"Mommy,"
she said in that careful voice children use when they're not sure if something is wrong.
"why does Daddy have a different family in his car?"
I followed her eyes. 2 rows over, parked under an oak tree shedding its last leaves, sat the black Escalade I had paid the insurance on 11 days before. A woman in a yellow wrap dress was buckling a baby into the rear seat. And Marcus, my husband of 9 years, was loading a stroller into the back like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Because he had. I'd been married to that man for 9 years. And in 30 seconds, my 6-year-old daughter taught me more about my marriage than 9 years of living it ever did. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I want to know who's up watching this with me. And if this story hits you, subscribe and hit that bell because trust me, you are going to want to hear every single second of what comes next. But to understand what happened next, I need to take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you who I was before all of this, because I think that matters. I think you need to know the woman who existed before that Thursday afternoon in the Bright Horizons parking lot, before everything I believed about my life turned out to be something I had built on sand. My name is Camille Renee Dorsey. I am 38 years old. I am a senior financial analyst at Meridian Capital Group in Buckhead, Atlanta, one of maybe a dozen Black women at that level in the entire firm. I have a master's degree from Clark Atlanta, a perfect attendance record that my manager still jokes about, and a color-coded budget spreadsheet for every single area of my life. Groceries, utilities, Zoe's college fund, which I started the month she was born, my retirement accounts, the emergency fund that I kept at 6 months of expenses, never less, because my grandmother always said, "A woman with no safety net is a woman at someone else's mercy." I lived by that. Every single day, I lived by that. I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, the youngest of 3 girls raised by a mother who worked double shifts at Grady Memorial and still had dinner on the table by 7. She taught me that a woman's financial independence was not optional, it was survival. So I built mine brick by brick from the time I got my first real paycheck at 23. By the time I was 35, I owned a 2,200 square foot home on Westmont Road in Cascade Heights, drove a paid-off Acura MDX, and had just over $90,000 in personal savings, separate from the joint account Marcus and I shared. That last detail matters. Remember it. At work, I was known for catching errors nobody else caught. My colleagues joked that I could smell a discrepancy in a financial report from across the building.
"Camille, you are the most detail-oriented person I have ever supervised. Nothing gets past you."
My manager, Patricia Osei, once told me in my annual review. She was right about spreadsheets. She had no idea how wrong she was about everything else. Outside of work, my whole world was Zoe. Zoe Amara Dorsey, 6 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with anything that involved glitter, and the absolute love of my life. Every morning, I dropped her at Bright Horizons by 7:45. Every evening, I picked her up by 5:30 unless I had a late close, and even then I always called to say goodnight if I couldn't be there for bath time. Every Saturday morning, we went to Freedom Park and fed the ducks. Every Sunday, she sat in my lap at Cascade United Methodist Church and drew on the back of the bulletin while Reverend Coleman preached, and I pretended not to notice. That was my life. Structured, intentional, full. And then there was Marcus. Marcus Dion Dorsey, 41 years old, 6 feet even, broad shoulders, the kind of smile that made strangers at the grocery store stop and say, "You two make such a beautiful couple." He was a commercial real estate broker or so. I understood it. He had a license. He had business cards. He had a LinkedIn profile with a professional headshot. What he did not have, I would later discover, was anything close to a consistent income. But in the beginning, God in the beginning, Marcus was everything. We met at a rooftop birthday party in Midtown in the summer of 2015. He brought me a drink I didn't ask for, told me I looked like someone who had the whole world figured out, and asked if he could be the one thing I hadn't planned for. I laughed so hard I spilled the drink he'd just handed me. We talked for 4 hours straight. He called the next morning at 9 a.m., not 9 p.m., 9 a.m., and said he hadn't slept because he kept thinking of things he forgot to ask me. I was 31 years old and I had never once in my life let anyone sweep me off my feet. Marcus Dorsey swept me completely off my feet. We got married 2 years later at a small ceremony in Piedmont Park. Brianna Holloway. My best friend since freshman year at Clark Atlanta stood beside me in a dusty rose dress and whispered in my ear right before I walked.
He's fine as all outdoors, Camille, but something about him has never fully sat right with me. You sure?
I squeezed her hand and told her she was being overprotective. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. The first few years were genuinely good. I want to be honest about that because this is an honest story. Marcus was present, attentive, funny. He cooked on weekends, really cooked, not just eggs and toast, but full meals, Cajun salmon and roasted vegetables and homemade cornbread. He remembered small things. The name of my difficult coworker, my coffee order, the anniversary of my father's passing. He showed up to Zoe's pediatric appointments without being asked. Our neighbors on Westmont Road thought we were the couple. I thought we were the couple. But even in the good years, there were small things I filed away without examining. The way Marcus got quiet when I asked specific questions about his deals, not defensive, just vague. The way he always had a reason why this quarter was slow, why that commission was delayed, why the market was soft. I believed him every time because I had no reason not to. Because he was my husband. Because I was busy. Because it was easier to believe him than to pull the thread. And then there was the money. About 14 months before that Thursday in the parking lot, Marcus came to me with what he called an opportunity. A commercial property in Smyrna, he said. A consortium of investors, he said. He just needed liquidity for 30 days to secure his position before the other partners moved in. He needed $50,000 from our joint account temporarily. I remember sitting at our kitchen table on a Sunday evening, Zoe asleep upstairs looking at the withdrawal form he'd slid across to me. Something in my stomach pulled tight. Not a scream, just a pull, the quiet kind. $50,000, Marcus.
Baby, I'm going to triple it. This is the deal I've been waiting for. You trust me, right?
I signed it. I signed it because I did trust him. Because he was my husband. Because I had spent 9 years building a version of Marcus Dorsey in my mind that bore very little resemblance to the man sitting across from me at that kitchen table. A few weeks later, I noticed something small, almost too small to mention. Our joint account showed 2 additional ATM withdrawals I didn't remember making, totaling $800 on 2 separate Wednesdays. When I mentioned it to Marcus, he barely looked up from his phone.
I told you about that, babe. Cash for the contractor.
I checked my memory. I checked my planner. I found no note about any contractor. I told myself I must have forgotten. I did not forget, but I filed it away. The way I had filed so many things away. Neat and organized in a drawer in my mind I was not yet ready to open. Looking back now, the signs were never hidden. They were right there on the surface, waiting for me to stop being afraid of what I would find if I actually looked. There is a photograph on my phone that I still have not deleted. I have thought about deleting it probably 200 times. I never do. It was taken on a Saturday morning in September, 14 months before the parking lot. We were in Savannah for a long weekend, just the 3 of us, a rented cottage 2 blocks from Forsyth Park, the kind of trip where you don't make reservations, and you don't check your work email, and you let a 6-year-old decide what you do next. Zoe decided we were going to the beach. Then she decided we were getting ice cream before lunch. Then she decided we were all going to dance on the sidewalk outside a jazz bar on Congress Street, because she liked the music coming through the door. So we danced. All 3 of us right there on the sidewalk, Zoe between us with her arms stretched up, reaching for both our hands. Marcus laughing with his head thrown back, me laughing so hard my stomach hurt. A stranger stopped and took the photo without asking. Then she handed me her phone to show me smiled and said, "That right there is what a real family looks like." I saved it immediately. That was the last trip where I believed every single thing about my life. The last time I looked at Marcus and felt nothing but certainty. I want you to hold that image, the three of us on that sidewalk, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make it hurt. That's the point. The happiness was real, which is exactly what made the betrayal so devastating. We came home from Savannah on a Sunday night. The following Wednesday, Marcus received a phone call after dinner. His phone lit up on the kitchen counter. No name, just a number, and something shifted in his face. Just for a second. A flicker. He picked it up, said,
"Give me a minute,"
and walked out to the back porch. I watched him through the kitchen window. He stood with his back to the glass, one hand in his pocket, speaking low and fast. After maybe 4 minutes, he came back inside, slipped the phone into his pocket, and said the call was about a deal in Buckhead that was moving faster than expected. I said, okay. I handed him the dish towel. We finished cleaning up together, but I stood at that kitchen window for a few seconds after he walked away, and I felt it again, that quiet pull in my stomach. The same one I'd felt at the kitchen table when I signed the withdrawal form. Not a scream, just a pull. I ignored it. Again. The cracks came slowly after that. Not dramatic, not movie-style blow-ups. Just a slow, steady cooling the way a house loses heat in winter. You don't notice it happening until one morning you wake up and the whole place is cold. Marcus started criticizing me in ways that were small enough to dismiss individually, but looking back formed a clear and deliberate pattern. It started with comments about work.
"Another late night, huh? Zoe asked me where you were again."
Then comments about the house.
"I feel like I'm the only one keeping this place together."
Then one evening in October, while I was reviewing a quarterly report at the kitchen table after Zoe went to bed, he stood in the doorway and said in a tone that was almost casual, almost kind, which somehow made it worse.
"You know what your problem is. You think loving someone means paying their bills on time. That's not love, Camille. That's a service contract. And I needed more than a service contract."
I looked up from my laptop. What does that mean?
He shrugged. "It means I wish you were as invested in this marriage as you are in that spreadsheet."
Then he went upstairs. I sat at that table for a long time after he left. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself real estate had been slow and that was affecting his mood. I told myself every marriage goes through rough patches and the strong ones push through. I told myself all of it. What I did not do, what I should have done, was call Brianna that night. Instead, I closed my laptop, went upstairs, and lay down next to my husband in the dark. He was already asleep, or pretending to be. The following month, I found the receipt. I was looking for his dry cleaning ticket in the pocket of his gray wool overcoat, the one I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago, and my fingers closed around a folded piece of paper. A restaurant receipt. Nori, a sushi place on Crescent Avenue in Midtown. Dinner for 2. $112 before tip. Dated a Tuesday in November. A Tuesday when Marcus had told me he was in Birmingham for a 2-day brokers conference. I stood in our closet for a long time holding that receipt. Then I heard Zoe calling from her room.
Mommy, I can't find my purple crayon.
And I put the receipt back in his pocket, went to help my daughter find her crayon, and spent the next 40 minutes building a castle out of building blocks on her bedroom floor, laughing at her jokes, pretending my hands were not shaking. That night, I asked Marcus about the Birmingham trip casually while we were making dinner. How was the conference? Did he see anyone he knew? He launched into 15 minutes of detail hotel name panel discussions, the restaurant where the group ate. Smooth. Specific. Effortless. The kind of effortless that only comes with practice. I did not mention the receipt. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd gone to dinner with a client before driving to Birmingham. Maybe the date on the receipt was wrong. Maybe I was tired and reading too much into things.
"You're imagining things, Camille."
That was what he said 2 weeks later when I finally gently, carefully mentioned that I'd noticed he seemed distant.
"You're stressed from work, and you're projecting it onto us. This is what you do. You analyze everything until you find a problem that isn't there."
I almost believed him. Almost. Because here is what gaslighting actually feels like from the inside. It does not feel like being lied to. It feels like losing your mind slowly, degree by degree, until you genuinely cannot trust the evidence of your own eyes. I was a woman who caught financial errors from across a building, and this man had me questioning a receipt I had held in my own hands. That is how good he was. But somewhere underneath all the doubt, underneath the self-questioning and the justifying and the exhausting mental gymnastics of loving someone who is lying to your face, somewhere underneath all of that, a small, steady part of me was keeping score, writing things down in a place Marcus could not reach. It would not stay quiet forever. I told myself it was stress. I told myself marriages go through rough patches. I told myself I was overreacting. I was wrong on all 3 counts. And the proof was coming on a Thursday afternoon in late October from the back seat of my own car in the voice of my 6-year-old daughter. I want to take you back to that parking lot because I skipped over something important. When Zoe asked me that question,
Mommy, why does Daddy have a different family in his car?
I did not react the way you might expect. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I did not slam the car into drive and go confront Marcus right there in the Bright Horizons pickup line with 30 other parents watching. I went completely still. That is what shock actually feels like in my experience. Not noise, not movement. Just a sudden total stillness, like every system in your body hitting pause at the same time. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel engine running, and I watched Marcus close the rear hatch of the Escalade. The woman in the yellow wrap dress, she had natural hair, a big, beautiful halo of it, and she was laughing at something leaned against the passenger door while he walked around to the driver's side. He touched the small of her back as he passed her, casually, automatically. The way you touch someone when touching them has become as natural as breathing. I know that touch. I used to be on the receiving end of it. Zoe was quiet in the back seat, sensing something without understanding what. She had already moved on, pulling a crayon from her backpack, humming to herself. 6 years old. Bless her. She had no idea what she had just handed me. I drove home in silence. I gave Zoe her snack. I helped her with her reading homework. I ran her bath, washed her hair, read her 2 chapters of her book, and sat beside her bed until she fell asleep. I did all of it on autopilot with a smile on my face, while something inside me was very quietly coming apart at the seams. Then I went to the living room, opened the family iPad, the one Marcus and I shared an Apple ID on, the one we used for Zoe's educational apps and family photos, and nothing important, or so I'd thought, and I opened the location history. I want to pause here and tell you something about being a financial analyst. When you spend every day working with data, you develop a relationship with information that most people don't have. You learn that numbers don't lie. Systems don't lie. Location, data, purchase history, timestamps. These things do not have feelings, and they do not have reasons to protect anyone. They simply record what happened. What the location history recorded stopped my heart. There was an address in Decatur that appeared in Marcus's location data with a regularity that was almost taunting. 114 Avondale Terrace, Decatur. Every Wednesday. Every Friday. Sometimes Saturday mornings. Saturday mornings when he told me he was showing properties or meeting with clients or any one of a dozen explanations I had accepted without question. The earliest entry I could find was from 22 months ago. 22 months. I sat on that couch and I did the math the way I always do, automatically, precisely without mercy. 22 months of Wednesdays and Fridays. Roughly 85 to 90 visits. 85 to 90 times Marcus had driven to 114 Avondale Terrace in Decatur while I was at work or putting Zoe to bed or signing withdrawal forms at the kitchen table because I trusted him. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I think I had gone somewhere past shaking. I heard Marcus's key in the front door at 9:47 that evening. I know the exact time because I was still sitting in the same spot on the couch iPad in my lap, and I looked at the clock on the cable box when I heard the lock turn. 9:47. He had been gone since 3 in the afternoon. He told me that morning he had back-to-back client meetings until 7, then drinks with a colleague from his office. He came in smiling. He always came in smiling.
Hey, baby,
He said, dropping his keys on the entryway table.
Zoe down.
Since 8, I said. Something in my voice must have been different because he looked at me a half-second longer than usual before walking to the kitchen. I followed him. Marcus, I said, where is 114 Avondale Terrace? The refrigerator door was open. He had his back to me, and I watched his shoulders do something a tightening almost imperceptible that lasted less than a second before he turned around with a container of leftover pasta in his hand and an expression of total practiced calm on his face.
What?
114 Avondale Terrace in Decatur, I said again. You've been there 80-something times in the last 22 months. I saw it on the location history. He set the pasta on the counter. He looked at me with something that almost resembled patience, the kind of patience that is actually condescension wearing a costume.
Camille.
Don't, I said.
Baby, listen to me. I have a commercial client who owns a property on that street. I've been managing the lease negotiations for almost 2 years. You know how long commercial deals take.
Every Wednesday and Friday.
When the deal requires it, yes.
He crossed his arms.
What is this really about? Did something happen today?
And there it was. The pivot. The redirect. The sudden transformation of my reasonable question into evidence of my own instability.
You're doing that thing again.
He said, his voice dropping into something softer, more dangerous.
Where you get stressed from work, and you come home and you look for something to be upset about. Camille, I'm worried about you. I've been worried about you for a while.
I'm not stressed, Marcus.
You're standing in the kitchen at 10 o'clock at night, interrogating me about a client property because of location data on an iPad.
He shook his head slowly.
You're imagining things, Camille, and I think you need to talk to someone, professionally.
I stared at him. This man who had touched the small of another woman's back like breathing, who had been somewhere I had never heard of 85 times, who was standing in the kitchen I paid the mortgage on in the house I had bought, eating food from the refrigerator I stocked, telling me I needed professional help for asking a single question. I said nothing. I turned around, walked upstairs, went to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the edge of the tub, and called Brianna Holloway at 2:14 in the morning.
Hello.
She picked up on the second ring.
Hello.
Brie, I said. My voice was very quiet. I need to talk to you. She was silent for just a moment.
Don't touch anything. Don't say another word to him tonight. And Camille, do not let him see your face until you talk to me. Can you do that?
Yes, I said.
Good. Come to my office tomorrow. 9 a.m. I'll move whatever I have to move.
I asked her how she could be so ready, so immediate, like she had been waiting for this call. She paused again. Longer this time.
Because I've been sitting on something for 6 weeks and I didn't know how to tell you. I think it's time you knew.
Brianna knew something I didn't. She'd been waiting for this call for longer than I realized. Brianna Holloway has been my best friend for 17 years. We met the first week of freshman year at Clark Atlanta. She was in the room next to mine in Pfeiffer Hall, and she knocked on my door at 11 at night to borrow a phone charger and stayed until 3 in the morning talking about everything and nothing. She's the kind of friend who shows up, not just for the big things, for the Tuesday afternoon things, the 2 in the morning things. She has never once in 17 years let me down. She is also one of the sharpest family law attorneys in Fulton County, and she had been sitting on information about my husband for 6 weeks. I walked into her office on Peachtree Street at 9 the next morning. She had coffee waiting. She did not hug me first, which told me everything Brianna only skips the hug, when what she has to say requires her to be a lawyer before she can be a friend. She sat down across from me, folded her hands on the desk, and said,
6 weeks ago, a colleague of mine, a broker on the commercial side, mentioned a name at a networking event. Marcus Dorsey. Said he'd heard Marcus was quietly consulting a divorce attorney. Not filing, just consulting. Gathering information about asset division custody frameworks timelines.
The coffee cup in my hand went very still. He's been planning this, I said. Not a question.
I don't know how long, she said. But Camille, if he's already in the consultation phase, he has a strategy. And his strategy almost certainly involves establishing himself as Zoe's primary caregiver, using your work hours against you.
I thought about every late evening, every work trip, Every time Marcus had volunteered enthusiastically, almost eagerly to handle Zoe's pickup, her doctor's appointments, her school events when I had a deadline, I had been grateful. I had told friends and colleagues what a hands-on father he was. I had bragged about it. He had been building a case.
Brianna leaned forward. I want you to consider hiring a private investigator before you do anything else. Before you confront him again, before you move any money, before you change anything. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with.
2 days later, I met Derek Okonkwo in a coffee shop on Memorial Drive. 40-something, quiet former law enforcement, the kind of man who made you feel like information was completely safe with him. I gave him the Decatur address. I gave him the Escalade's plates. I gave him 10 days and $3,500 from my personal savings account, the account Marcus knew nothing about, the one my grandmother's money had started, the safety net. What Derek brought me 10 days later, I was not prepared for, even knowing what I suspected, even having braced myself in every way I knew how to brace. He set a manila folder on the table between us. Photographs, documents, a typed summary. He gave me a moment before he spoke. The woman's name is Denise Croft, he said. 34 years old, marketing coordinator. She's been at that Decatur address for just under 2 years. The lease is in both their names. Marcus Dorsey and Denise Croft signed 22 months ago. I opened the folder. The photographs were clear and clinical. Marcus and Denise outside the Decatur building. Marcus carrying groceries inside. Marcus pushing a stroller, the same stroller I had watched him load into the Escalade in the Bright Horizons parking lot. And in one photograph taken through a park fence, Denise sitting on a blanket in the grass with a baby boy on her lap, maybe 16 to 18 months old, and Marcus sitting beside her with his arm around her shoulders. A baby boy. My husband had a son. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I did not cry in Derek's office. I have thought about why, and I think it is because the grief was too large for tears right then. It needed more space than a coffee shop on Memorial Drive could hold. There's more, Derek said quietly. He told me that in the course of his surveillance, he had observed something that required him to tell me directly. Denise Croft had been present on at least 4 occasions when Marcus had Zoe. 4 Saturdays when Marcus took our daughter out ostensibly to the park to the Children's Museum to breakfast, Zoe had spent time in the company of Denise Croft and the baby. My 6-year-old daughter had been introduced into that household without my knowledge, without my consent. That was why she recognized the Escalade in the parking lot. That was why she recognized the woman in the yellow dress. That was why she asked me in her careful 6-year-old voice why Daddy had a different family in his car. She had already met them. She just didn't know what they were. Something moved through me when Derek told me that something hot and clarifying like a fever breaking. Not just grief, not just betrayal, something older and fiercer than both. I drove home that evening and Marcus was in the kitchen on the phone laughing. He waved at me when I walked in. Casual, comfortable, like a man with nothing to hide. 2 days later, he gave me that wave again, standing in the doorway of my home office, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, and said,
Denise actually looks at me when I walk in the room. You know when's the last time you looked at me like that? I don't even remember. Neither do you.
I looked up from my screen. I held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Okay, Marcus. I said, just that. Just okay. I turned back to my screen. He waited for more. He wanted more, the argument, the tears, the reaction he could use. He stood there for another moment, then pushed off the door frame and walked away. That night, I lay in the dark beside him and I thought about the $50,000, about 22 months of Wednesdays and Fridays, about a lease signed in both their names, about a baby boy I had never heard of, about my daughter sitting on a blanket in a park with a woman whose existence I didn't know about. And then I thought about the document Brianna had mentioned, the condo investment paperwork Marcus had been quietly pushing me to sign for the last 3 months. A transfer of partial interest in a jointly held investment property, he said. Standard restructuring, he said. Nothing to worry about. I had not signed it. I kept forgetting, I told him. I was busy, I told him. He wasn't just being unfaithful to me. He had a whole exit strategy, a timeline, a financial plan. And I had almost walked directly into every single step of it. Almost. He wasn't just cheating on me. He had a whole exit strategy, and I almost walked right into it. Brianna called me on a Wednesday morning 3 days after I gave her Derek's folder. She said,
"Come in at lunch, and Camille, eat something before you come. I mean it."
I knew then that what she had found was worse than what I already knew, because Brianna has seen everything in her years of family law. Infidelity, financial fraud, custody manipulation, all of it. She does not tell people to eat something before they come unless she is about to take the floor out from under them. I ate half a sandwich at my desk at 11:30. I tasted none of it. Her office was quiet when I arrived. Her assistant had been sent to lunch early. The door was closed. Brianna was sitting behind her desk with Derek's folder open in front of her and 3 additional documents laid out in a row to the right. She had her reading glasses on, which she only wears when she means absolute business. She did not waste time.
Derek pulled the lease agreement on the Decatur property. She said, 114 Avondale Terrace, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, signed 22 months ago. Monthly rent $2,100.
She slid the first document across to me.
Look at the date it was signed.
I looked. October 14th. 22 months ago. I stared at that date. I turned it over in my mind. I counted backward the way I always count automatically without effort. October 14th, 22 months ago. 1 week. 1 week after I had signed the withdrawal form at our kitchen table and transferred $50,000 into Marcus's business account for the Smyrna investment opportunity that would triple our money. He used it, I said. My voice came out very flat. He used my money.
The first and last month's deposit on that lease was $4,200, Brianna said. Paid in cash. The remaining balance furniture appliances, deposits on utilities, Derek tracked through a business account Marcus opened 6 weeks before the lease was signed. That account received a wire transfer of $47,000 the day after you signed the withdrawal form.
The truth did not hit me like a wave. It hit me like a wall. Solid and immovable and absolutely without mercy. I had handed Marcus Dorsey $50,000 of my own money, and he had used it to build a home for another woman and their child. He had sat across from me at our kitchen table, looked me in the eye, and told me it was an investment opportunity. He had asked me if I trusted him. I had signed the form.
There's more, Brianna said.
And the way she said it carefully, like she was setting something fragile down, made me grip the edge of her desk. She slid the second document across. It was a printout of a text message exchange that Derek had obtained through legal channels during his investigation. The messages were between Marcus and Denise, dated about 8 months ago. I read them.
When are you finally going to tell Camille I'm tired of being the secret? Jabari is almost a year old and your wife doesn't even know he exists.
I hear you. But the timing has to be right. I'm working on the property transfer once she signs that we're protected on the asset side. Just give me 6 more months. The timing needs to be right for the money.
6 months. Marcus, you keep saying that.
6 months, baby. Then it's done. I promise you.
I read those messages 3 times. Then I set the paper down on Brianna's desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely reliable. He was not leaving me because he had fallen in love with someone else. He was not leaving me because the marriage had broken down and he had found comfort somewhere else. Those explanations, as painful as they are, have a kind of human logic to them. What Marcus was doing had no feeling in it at all. He was executing a financial extraction. He was waiting for me to sign a document that would protect his assets in a divorce settlement. He had a baby with another woman, a lease in her name, and a timeline, a strategy, and he was managing it the way you manage a transaction, patiently, methodically, without sentiment. He had learned those skills from me, from watching me work, from 11 years of listening to me talk about risk management and asset protection and the importance of timing. He had used everything I taught him. The room did not spin. I want to be clear about that because in stories like this, people always say the room was spinning. Mine did not spin. It just stopped. Everything stopped. The hum of Brianna's air conditioning. The traffic sounds from Peachtree Street below. My own breathing for a moment. Everything went absolutely still. Then Brianna slid the third document across. It was a copy of a consultation intake form from the office of Gerald Fitch, a divorce attorney in Sandy Springs, dated 4 months ago. Client name Marcus Dion Dorsey. Under the notes section in the intake attorney's handwriting, client seeking info re-primary custody claim based on spouse's work schedule and limited daily caregiving role. Client also inquiring re-asset division. Timeline re-pending property transfer. 4 months ago. While I was packing Zoe's lunch every morning and paying the mortgage and believing somehow still, that my marriage was in a rough patch, I sat in that chair in Brianna's office for a long time after she stopped talking. She let me. She did not try to fill the silence with comfort or strategy or next steps. She just let me sit there with the truth, which is the kindest thing she could have done. Eventually, I said, he used Zoe. He was using Zoe this whole time. Every time he volunteered to do pickup, every pediatric appointment, every school event, he was building a record.
Yes, Brianna said.
And Denise knew. She knew he had a wife and daughter, and she stayed anyway.
Yes, Brianna said again.
And he was going to wait until I signed that property transfer and then pull the entire thing down on top of me.
That is what the evidence suggests, Brianna said carefully, which is why you are never signing that document, and why we are going to move very carefully and very quietly from this point forward.
I nodded. I looked out her window at the Atlanta skyline. I thought about the photograph on my phone, the three of us on the sidewalk in Savannah, Zoe's arms stretched up, Marcus laughing. I thought about the stranger who had taken it. That right there is what a real family looks like. I thought about the baby boy named Jabari, 16 months old, who had done nothing wrong, who was in his own way as much a victim of his father's coldness as the rest of us. And then I thought about my grandmother's voice. A woman with no safety net is a woman at someone else's mercy. I had a safety net. Marcus didn't know about it. He had never known about it. That night I went home. I opened my laptop, and I pulled up a blank spreadsheet. I created a new column. I titled it, Evidence. I was done grieving. It was time to get to work. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes over you when grief finishes its first wave and something harder moves in to take its place. It is not peace, it is not acceptance. It is something colder than both a settling, like a building after an earthquake, when the structure stops shaking and you can finally assess the damage and decide what stays standing and what has to come down. That quiet came over me the night I opened that spreadsheet. I sat at my desk in the home office, the room Marcus called my second bedroom, because he said I spent more time in it than anywhere else in the house, and I started building the most important document of my life. Not a financial report, not a quarterly analysis. A record, organized by date, cross-referenced by evidence type, hyperlinked to every photograph Derek had taken, every document Brianna had pulled, every ATM withdrawal I had flagged and filed away in the back of my mind for months without letting myself examine it too closely. I worked until 2 a.m. Then I saved 3 copies, one on my personal laptop, one on a cloud drive Marcus had no access to, one on a thumb drive I kept in my car's glove compartment inside a decoy case for Zoe's audiobooks. Then I went to bed, lay down beside my husband in the dark, and fell asleep faster than I had in months, because I finally knew exactly where I stood, and that even in the worst circumstances is always better than not knowing. The next morning, I called Brianna from my car in the Meridian Capital parking garage before I went inside for work. "I'm ready," I said. "Tell me exactly what we do and in exactly what order." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her smiling.
Okay, she said. First rule, nothing changes on the surface. You go home tonight and you make dinner and you help Zoe with her homework and you watch TV with your husband if that's what you normally do on a Thursday. Nothing changes. He cannot know you know.
I understand.
Second rule, do not sign anything. Any document he puts in front of you, I don't care how routine he says it is, you tell him you need to review it with your financial advisor first. Give me every document.
Done.
Third rule, we file first. Her voice was precise and deliberate. In Georgia, the spouse who files sets the initial terms of the narrative. We are not letting Marcus Dorsey control the narrative of this divorce. We file before he does, we file on our timeline, and we file when we have everything documented and in order.
I exhaled. How long?
3 to 4 weeks if we move efficiently. Can you hold it together for 3 to 4 weeks?
I thought about 16 months of holding it together, about smiling at neighborhood barbecues and church on Sundays and parent-teacher conferences while something slowly rotted underneath. 3 to 4 more weeks was nothing. I can hold it together, I said. What followed was the strangest month of my life. I went home every evening and I was Camille Dorsey, wife and mother. I made Marcus's coffee the way he liked it, 2 sugars oat milk heated exactly 60 seconds in the microwave, because changing that detail might make him look at me differently. I sat across from him at dinner and I listened to him talk about his day with appropriate responses. I watched him with Zoe, watched him read to her, watched him braid her hair on Saturday mornings, watched him be genuinely tenderly good with her, and I held both truths at once without letting either one crack my face. He was a good father. That was the most complicated grief of all, that the man who had betrayed me so completely was also in the specific and narrow context of being Zoe's father, someone she genuinely loved and who genuinely loved her back. I had to hold that. I had no choice but to hold that. Meanwhile, Brianna and I were building our case with the precision of a financial audit. Then something happened that I had not anticipated. Marcus's father called me. Harold Dorsey is 67 years old, a retired electrician from College Park, a quiet man with enormous hands and a habit of calling everyone baby girl, regardless of age or relationship. He has always been kind to me. He was kinder to me in some ways than Marcus ever was present at Zoe's birthday parties, always the first to arrive and last to leave, the kind of grandfather who remembers what flavor of cake his granddaughter prefers without being reminded. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the Meridian Capital parking garage eating a sandwich between meetings. I almost didn't answer. I was not ready to perform normalcy for Harold, but something made me pick up. "Baby girl," he said without preamble. "I need to talk to you, in person, not on the phone." I was very still. "Harold, I know," he said quietly. "I know about what my son has been doing. I've known for a while, and I've been carrying something I should have put down a long time ago." A pause. "I'm not proud of that, but I'm ready to make it right now, if you'll let me." I sat in that parking garage for a long moment. Then I said, "Tell me what you have." What Harold told me, what he had been sitting on for 8 months, unable to reconcile with his own conscience, was this. Marcus had asked him 8 months ago to hold on to a set of documents, financial records, a folder of business account statements, property valuation reports, and income documentation. Marcus told his father he was keeping them somewhere private in case Camille ever tried to access his accounts. Harold, who trusted his son and did not understand the full picture, had agreed. But Harold was not a man who could leave a folder unread indefinitely. His conscience would not allow it. After 2 months, he had opened it, and what he read told him everything. The documents showed that Marcus had been systematically underreporting his income, not just to Camille, but in the financial affidavits he had already begun preparing for divorce proceedings. He had created a paper trail designed to make him look nearly broke, so that in any asset division, Camille would appear to be the only one with resources worth splitting. Meanwhile, the real money commissions paid in cash, a separate LLC income, routed through Denise's address, existed in documents that only Harold now knew about. Harold had photocopied everything, quietly, without telling Marcus. He had been waiting. He told me for a moment when he could make it right. Then Marcus made his final miscalculation. 2 weeks before the court date, he was now aware was coming because Brianna had filed and he had been served. Marcus called his father, and in a moment of arrogance that would cost him everything, told Harold he expected him to testify on his behalf, to speak to Marcus's character, to confirm that Camille was an absent mother. Harold said nothing on that call. Just, "I'll think about it, son." Then he called me. Then that same evening, Marcus pushed open my home office door, leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, and said with a smile that made my skin crawl,
Just so you know, I already talked to Zoe about the changes that are coming. She's fine with it. Kids are resilient.
He had talked to our 6-year-old daughter about our divorce without telling me, without asking me. He had walked into her room at some point in the last 48 hours and planted seeds in her mind about what her life was about to look like. And then he'd come to tell me about it like it was a power move he was proud of. I looked at him from behind my desk. I kept my face completely neutral. I thought about Harold's photocopies sitting in Brianna's office safe. I thought about the spreadsheet with 3 backup copies. I thought about everything that was coming in 14 days. Okay, Marcus, I said, exactly the way I'd said it before. He waited for more. I gave him nothing. He pushed off the doorframe and walked away. And I turned back to my screen and thought, Marcus thought he was playing me. He had no idea I'd been holding all the cards for weeks. Brianna filed on a Monday morning at 8:53 a.m. I know the exact time because she texted me the moment the clerk's office stamped the petition. I was sitting at my desk at Meridian Capital with my office door closed and a cup of coffee going cold beside my keyboard. When my phone buzzed, I picked it up and read her message twice.
It's done. Camille Renee Dorsey versus Marcus Dion Dorsey. Filed and stamped. He'll be served within 48 hours. How are you feeling?
I typed back. Ready. That was the truest thing I had said in months. Marcus was served on a Wednesday afternoon. I was not home when it happened deliberately. I had taken Zoe to my mother's house in Southwest Atlanta after school pickup. I told my mother only that things with Marcus were difficult and that I needed Zoe somewhere safe and loved for a few days. My mother asked no questions. She pulled Zoe inside, looked at me over my daughter's head with eyes that had seen everything and said,
You come back when you're done doing what you need to do.
Brianna called me at 4:17 that afternoon.
He's been served.
How did he react? A pause.
His attorney called mine within 20 minutes. So, that tells you everything.
What followed in the next 10 days confirmed every calculation Brianna and I had made. Marcus moved fast the way people move when they realize the timeline they controlled has been taken from them. He retained Gerald Fitch, the same Sandy Springs divorce attorney whose intake form we already had in our evidence file. He filed a counter petition within 72 hours. He called mutual friends, I later learned, and began constructing a narrative. Camille was unstable. Camille was obsessive. Camille had been emotionally absent from the marriage for years. He was the one who had held the family together. He was the one Zoe needed. He was building the same case he had been building for months. He just thought he was building it in secret. He did not know we had already read the blueprint. The mediation session was scheduled for a Thursday 10 days before the court date. I dressed carefully that morning, a charcoal wrap dress, low heels, my grandmother's pearl earrings. Nothing aggressive. Nothing that read as anything other than composed and professional. Brianna met me in the lobby of the mediation center on Peachtree Battle Avenue and looked me over once.
Good, she said. You look like exactly what you are.
What's that?
The most prepared person in that room.
Marcus arrived 7 minutes late with Gerald Fitch, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to winning. Marcus himself was dressed sharply new suit, I noted charcoal gray. The kind of purchase you make when you want to perform confidence rather than feel it. He glanced at me when he walked in and arranged his face into something meant to communicate regret and dignity simultaneously. He had practiced that expression. I could tell. The session began. Gerald Fitch presented Marcus's position with smooth, well-organized language. A devoted father whose wife's demanding career had created an unintentional but documented imbalance in the daily caregiving of their daughter. He used the word documented 4 times. Marcus nodded at each point with his hands folded on the table. The picture of a reasonable man reluctantly forced into an unreasonable situation. Then Gerald Fitch looked directly at me and said with the particular condescension of a man who has underestimated his opponent many times without consequence, "We are prepared to be generous in terms of Ms. Dorsey's visitation schedule given the circumstances." Visitation. He said visitation. For my own daughter. I felt Brianna's hand close briefly over mine under the table. Easy. Hold. I held. Marcus leaned back slightly in his chair. A micro adjustment almost imperceptible. The body language of a man who believes he has already won. He looked at me across the table, and then he said it. The last of his 4 sentences. The one I had been waiting for.
Look, I stayed in this marriage for the last 2 years out of pity, Camille, because I knew you had nobody else. I didn't want to be the one who left you with nothing. Don't make me regret that kindness.
The room was quiet for a moment. Gerald Fitch looked faintly uncomfortable. Even he, I think, recognized that his client had just said something that would not serve him well. I looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then I looked at Brianna. Brianna opened her portfolio with the particular unhurried calm of a woman who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. She removed a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the table to Gerald Fitch.
We won't be discussing visitation schedules today, she said pleasantly. What we will be discussing is why your client's financial affidavit lists his annual income as $41,000 when we have documentation of a separate LLC, 3 years of cash commissions, and income routed through a Decatur address that does not appear anywhere in his submitted financial disclosure.
Gerald Fitch looked at the paper. His expression did not change immediately, but his eyes moved differently. A quick, controlled recalibration that told me he was seeing something he had not been told about. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the paper in Fitch's hand with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not denial, something quieter and more revealing. The look of a man who had just understood for the first time that the game is not what he thought it was.
Furthermore, Brianna continued, we have text message documentation establishing that your client was aware of and planning this divorce proceeding for at least 18 months prior to filing, during which time he continued to induce my client to sign financial documents that would have materially disadvantaged her in these proceedings. We also have testimony from a witness your client himself listed as a character reference.
Marcus's head came up very slowly at that last sentence. A witness, Gerald Fitch said carefully. Who?
Harold Dorsey, Brianna said. Marcus's father.
The silence in that room was unlike any silence I have ever sat inside. It had texture, weight. Marcus went very still, completely different from his earlier practiced composure. This was not a performance. This was a man standing on ground that had just revealed itself to be hollow. Fitch requested a recess immediately. Marcus stood without speaking and followed his attorney into the hallway. Through the glass panel beside the door, I watched Marcus turn slowly, his jaw working without producing sound. I picked up my coffee cup. It was still warm. He had no idea, I said quietly.
Not even close, Brianna said. She allowed herself a small, precise smile. Court date is still Thursday. Let him spend the next 10 days knowing what's coming and not being able to stop it. That's the worst thing we can do to a man like Marcus Dorsey.
She was right. Court date was set for Thursday. Marcus walked out of that mediation room and into the hallway. I watched his shoulders, those broad, confident shoulders I had known for 11 years. They carried something different than they had carried walking in. He had walked in carrying certainty. He walked out carrying dread. He had no idea Thursday was going to be the worst day of his life. The Fulton County Courthouse on Pryor Street smells like old paper and central air conditioning, and the particular tension of people who are about to have their lives decided by someone in a black robe. I've been inside that building before, once for jury duty, once to notarize a property document, but walking in that Thursday morning felt nothing like either of those times. It felt like walking into the last chapter of something, which is exactly what it was. Brianna was beside me. Derek Okonkwo was 3 rows behind us in the gallery, available if needed. My mother had Zoe. Harold Dorsey was, and this is the detail that still moves me when I think about it, sitting quietly in the second row of the gallery in his good church suit, the dark navy one he wears for Easter and funerals. He had arrived before us. He was already there when we walked in, and he stood when he saw me, and he took both my hands in his enormous ones and said simply, "I'm sorry it took me this long, baby girl. I'm here now." I squeezed his hands and told him that was enough. Marcus arrived with Gerald Fitch at 8:51, 9 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin. He was dressed impeccably, that same charcoal suit from the mediation, freshly pressed, a burgundy tie I recognized as one I had given him for his 39th birthday. He walked in with his chin level and his shoulders set, and the careful, composed expression of a man who has spent 10 days rebuilding his confidence after having it shaken. He had not seen Harold yet. Harold was seated at an angle behind the gallery divider, partially obscured. I watched Marcus scan the room when he entered a quick practice sweep, and I watched his eyes pass over that section without stopping. He sat down. He leaned toward Fitch and said something. Fitch nodded. Marcus straightened in his chair and glanced across the aisle at me with an expression that was almost pitying, and I understood that in the 10 days since mediation, he had reconstructed his certainty. He had told himself that Brianna's documentation was a bluff or overstated or manageable. He had told himself Harold would not actually testify against him. He had told himself that no judge in Fulton County was going to give primary custody to a woman who billed 55 hours a week. He had rebuilt his confidence on sand. Again, the Honorable Judge Renee Lattimore entered at 9:02. 60-something silver locks, reading glasses on a beaded chain, the unhurried manner of a woman who has presided over enough human disaster to be unshockable. She reviewed the preliminary documents with focused efficiency, asked both attorneys a series of precise questions, and then looked up over her glasses and said, "Counsel, I understand there is a matter of financial disclosure discrepancy that the petitioner wishes to address before we proceed to custody arguments. Let's hear that first." Gerald Fitch shifted in his seat.
Brianna stood. What she laid out in the next 22 minutes was the cleanest, most methodical dismantling I have ever witnessed. And I work in financial analysis for a living. She walked Judge Lattimore through Marcus's submitted financial affidavit, $41,000 annual income, and then line by line, document by document, she walked her through the reality. The LLC registered in Marcus's initials. The cash commission payments Derek had traced. The income routed through the Decatur address. The $50,000 wire transfer from our joint account to Marcus's business account, dated 1 week before the lease on 114 Avondale Terrace was signed. The text messages. The timeline.
Judge Lattimore's expression did not change dramatically as Brianna spoke, but her pen moved. She was writing things down which Brianna had told me is always the sign that a judge is building toward something.
Then Brianna said, "Your Honor, at this time, the petitioner calls Harold James Dorsey as a witness."
The room shifted. I was watching Marcus when Brianna said his father's name. I had positioned myself deliberately so that Marcus was in my sightline, and I did not look away when Harold stood from the gallery and made his way to the front of the courtroom. I wanted to see it. I had earned the right to see it. The color left Marcus's face in a single visible wave. I watched it happen the way you watch weather move across open water, fast and total and unstoppable. His mouth opened, closed. His hand resting on the table curled into a fist and then flattened and then curled again, like he could not decide what to do with it. Sweat appeared at his hairline almost immediately, fine and sudden, like condensation on cold glass.
"Dad,"
he said under his breath. Not to anyone. Just the word released involuntarily like air from a puncture. Harold did not look at his son as he was sworn in. He looked at Judge Lattimore, and he answered her questions in the deliberate, careful voice of a man who has rehearsed his honesty until it came naturally. He confirmed that Marcus had given him the documents to hold. He confirmed that he had read them. He confirmed that he had made copies and provided those copies to the petitioner's attorney.
Then Brianna asked him one final question. Mr. Dorsey, why are you here today?"
Harold was quiet for a moment. He folded his hands in his lap. Then he said, "Because my son built something wrong on top of a good woman's foundation, and I raised him better than that. I can't fix what he did, but I can make sure the truth is in this room." Judge Lattimore wrote something, a long something. When Harold stepped down, he walked past Marcus's table. Marcus reached out and touched his father's arm, a desperate grasping gesture, and Harold stopped. He looked at his son for a long moment. Then he gently removed Marcus's hand from his arm, patted it once, and walked back to his seat. Gerald Fitch requested a brief recess. Judge Lattimore denied it. She looked at Marcus over her reading glasses with the expression of a woman who has seen every variety of human deception and finds none of it surprising and none of it acceptable, and she said, "Mr. Dorsey, I am looking at a financial affidavit that appears to have been prepared with deliberate intent to misrepresent your income and assets to this court. I am also looking at documentation suggesting that the marital funds you induced your wife to transfer were used to establish and maintain a separate household during the course of your marriage. I want you to understand that both of these matters will be referred for further review."
Marcus's voice, when he tried to respond, came out fractured, thin, and uneven, stripped of every layer of practiced smoothness. "Your Honor, I can explain."
"You'll have the opportunity to do that," Judge Lattimore said with a finality that closed the door on his sentence. "Through proper channels." Then she looked at Brianna. "Counsel, I'd like to address the custody matter. I will not walk you through every word of what followed. What I will tell you is this. Judge Lattimore awarded me primary physical custody of Zoe Amara Dorsey. She established a structured visitation schedule for Marcus supervised, initially pending the outcome of the financial review. She ordered Marcus to repay the $50,000 to the marital estate with interest. She denied every element of his counter-petition. Gerald Fitch was writing rapidly and not looking at his client. Marcus sat very still through all of it. His hands were flat on the table. His tie, my birthday gift, the burgundy one, had a small wrinkle in it, now that hadn't been there when he walked in. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance, on nothing, on the specific empty air of a man watching everything he planned disintegrate in real time. When Judge Lattimore finished and the session was called to close, Marcus turned to me for the first time since Harold had taken the stand. His expression had gone through several transformations in the last hour and had landed finally on something I had not expected. A request. Not arrogance. Not anger. Something smaller.
"Camille," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't. I know it's not enough. But I am. I'm sorry. We could, if you would just—"
I looked at him. I took my time. I let the silence sit between us for a moment, unhurried the way he had never once let silence sit for me. "You're not sorry, Marcus," I said. My voice was very calm. "You sat across from me at our kitchen table and you asked me if I trusted you. I signed that form because I did. You took $50,000 of my money and you built a home for another woman and your son. You used our daughter as evidence in a case you were building against me for 18 months. You told me I was nothing but a paycheck with good credit. I picked up my portfolio from the table. You're not sorry, you're just sorry you got caught. There's a difference, and you know it." He had nothing left. I could see it, the absolute depletion of a man who spent everything he had on a strategy that failed completely. I turned to Harold, who was standing by the gallery rail. I hugged him for a long time. He held on. Then I walked out of that courtroom with Brianna beside me into the September light on Pryor Street, and I did not look back once. Not once. The first morning in the new house, I woke up before Zoe. That is not unusual. I am almost always awake before she is, have been, since the day she was born, some maternal alarm system that activates regardless of what time I went to sleep. But this morning was different. This morning I lay still for a moment before opening my eyes, and I did something I had not done in longer than I could accurately remember. I listened to the silence. Not the silence of a house where someone is hiding something. Not the silence of a woman holding her breath, waiting for a shoe to drop, monitoring the temperature of a room for signs of danger. Just silence, clean and uncomplicated. The silence of a space that belonged entirely to me and to my daughter, and to no performance. No strategy, no managed version of myself designed to avoid triggering someone else's anger. The house was on Fayetteville Road in East Atlanta, smaller than Westmont 3 bedrooms, 1,600 square feet a yard, with a fig tree in the back corner that Zoe immediately claimed as her personal territory. I had closed on it 6 weeks after the court date using the returned $50,000 plus the asset settlement Brianna had negotiated. It needed new paint in the kitchen, and one of the bathroom faucets ran slow, and the hardwood floors creaked in a specific spot near the hallway that I had already learned to step around, and Zoe had already learned to stomp on deliberately because she thought it was funny. It was the most beautiful house I had ever been inside. I got up that first morning and made coffee in the kitchen while the light came through the east-facing window over the sink, pale and gold, the particular quality of early morning light in Atlanta, in late spring when the trees are full and everything smells like possibility. I stood at that window in my socks and I drank my coffee and I did not think about Marcus. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about her voice. A woman with no safety net is a woman at someone else's mercy. I thought about how she had lived that principle her entire life and passed it to my mother, and my mother had passed it to me, and how that chain of quiet, fierce wisdom had been in the end the thing that saved me. Not luck, not a dramatic rescue. A savings account my husband didn't know about, and a best friend who picked up on the second ring at 2 a.m. A few minutes later, I heard the particular sound of Zoe's feet on the creaking floorboard, the deliberate stomp, then the giggle, and she appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, with her hair loose from last night's braids, holding her stuffed elephant Mr. Peanut under one arm.
Mommy, she said, can we have pancakes?
We can absolutely have pancakes, I said. She climbed onto the kitchen stool and propped her elbows on the counter and told me very seriously about a dream she'd had involving a purple horse and a swimming pool full of lemonade, and I made pancakes and listened to every word, and the morning sun moved across the kitchen floor in a slow, unhurried arc, and I thought this is what I was protecting. This was always what I was protecting. In the months that followed, I learned what it felt like to rebuild something. Not restore, not return to what was, but build something genuinely new from ground that had been cleared. It is slower than people tell you it will be. There are evenings when Zoe is at Marcus's for his scheduled visitation, and the house is quiet in the wrong way, and I sit with a glass of wine and I feel the grief move through me like weather, and I let it. I do not perform okayness when I am alone. I give the grief its time and then I get up and wash the glass and go to bed. But there are also Saturday mornings at Freedom Park Zoe running ahead of me on the path while Harold walks beside me, talking about nothing in particular, his enormous hands clasped behind his back. Harold comes every Sunday for dinner, now a development that surprised us both and has become one of the quiet, unlikely gifts of everything that happened. He and Zoe have a card game they play after dinner that involves a great deal of cheating on Zoe's part and theatrical outrage on Harold's. And I sit on the couch and watch them, and I feel something I can only describe as abundance. Not despite everything. Because of everything. Brianna comes on Friday evenings when her caseload allows. She brings wine and asks me how I'm really doing, not the public answer the real one, and I tell her. We sit on my porch in the dark the way we sat in her dorm room 17 years ago and talked about everything and nothing. And it occurs to me sometimes that the friendship I almost let someone convince me to doubt is one of the greatest things I have ever been given. As for Marcus, I will tell you what I know, and I will tell you it without satisfaction or cruelty, because I am done spending my energy on what he deserves. The financial review that Judge Lattimore initiated resulted in a formal finding of misrepresentation in his court filings. His broker's license was suspended pending review. The LLC he had structured was dissolved as part of the asset settlement. Denise Croft, I was told through a mutual acquaintance, moved out of the Decatur apartment 4 months after the court date. I do not know where either of them is now, and I have made a deliberate choice not to find out. What I know is that Marcus Dorsey came into a courtroom on a Thursday morning in September, believing he was the smartest person in the room. And he left that room with nothing he had come to take and everything he had tried to hide exposed under fluorescent light for a judge and a gallery and his own father to see. He once stood in the doorway of my home office, the office he called my second bedroom, and told me I was nothing but a paycheck with good credit. He once told me my love was a service contract. He once told me I had nobody else. He was wrong. I have my daughter. I have Brianna. I have Harold. I have my mother. I have colleagues who sent flowers when they heard. I have friends who showed up with food. I have a community I had undervalued when I was busy performing the life of a perfect wife. I have more than enough. I always did. I looked it up once, what it would have cost Marcus if his strategy had worked. If I had signed that property transfer, if he had filed first and established the narrative he wanted, if I had been the wife who fell apart instead of the analyst who documented everything, he would have walked away from 11 years of my labor, my savings, my credit, my sacrifice, with half of everything I had built. He would have taken Zoe's primary home. He would have left me starting over at 38 with nothing but the job he'd spent 2 years framing as the reason I was an unfit mother. He miscalculated one thing. He forgot that I am very, very good with numbers, and I never ever miss a discrepancy. The fig tree in the backyard produced fruit for the first time last August. Zoe picked everyone she could reach and ate most of them before I could intervene, and ended up with a stomachache and absolutely no regrets. I stood under that tree in the late afternoon heat, and I looked at my daughter, her gap-toothed grin, her sticky hands, her complete and uncomplicated joy, and I felt something settle in me that has not shifted since. I am home. My name is Camille Renee Dorsey. I am 38 years old. I am a senior financial analyst, a homeowner, a daughter, a friend, and the mother of the most extraordinary 6-year-old I have ever met. I was deceived by someone I loved. I was manipulated, gaslit, financially exploited, and underestimated by a man who believed that because he had fooled me, I could not see clearly. He was wrong. I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become when it happened. And what I chose, deliberately, methodically, one documented entry at a time, was to stand up, to get my daughter back, to walk out of that courtroom and into the light and not look back once. Not once. If you are listening to this and you are in a season where someone is making you doubt what you know to be true, hear me. Your gut is not broken. Your instincts are not the problem. The woman who noticed the receipt, who felt the pull in her stomach, who saved the extra copy on the thumb drive hidden in the audiobook case, that woman knows more than she is being given credit for. Trust her. She will not let you down. If this story moved you, if any part of it felt like something you needed to hear today, I want you to tell me in the comments. Tell me where you are in your own story, beginning, middle, or standing in the light on the other side. Every single comment gets read. You are not alone in this. If this channel has ever given you something real, please subscribe and share this video with someone who needs it. We keep showing up for each other. That is how this works.